So this is a great question, and the answer is the counteroffensive was never going to be the end-all be-all of this war. We got very spoiled watching major swaths of territory get taken back by Ukraine in Kharkiv and Kherson, and a lot of people somewhat expected that to continue. In this latest round of offensive operations by Ukraine, it was never going to be that. The Russians were eventually going to dig in, realizing that neither side has air superiority, so it is absolutely a ground fight at this point, and a ground fight favors the defense on every battlefield. The U.S. mitigates ground fighting defenses by having a mammoth amount of air superiority. I mean, we have the best air superiority fighter in the world. We have some of the best pilots in the world, along with our NATO partners. And we just have the ability to own the air very quickly. And when you own the air, you can overwhelm the defenses that develop trench systems and mine systems and such. So things like that, because Ukraine doesn't have air superiority, and neither does Russia, frankly, neither side can break through. So it becomes this slogging, slow movement through the battlefield, trying to clear mines, clear trenches, deal with artillery, tanks, infantry. Where the difference is Ukraine is getting a reconstitution of equipment. And this is where the if on the battlefield comes in. If they continue to get support from NATO, the West, and non-NATO partners, including Japan, South Korea, and other countries, they have the advantage. This over time, not in the immediate battle, but over time, they have the advantage because Russia isn't reconstituting equipment as fast as NATO is providing it to Ukraine. They just don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the funding. They're relying on massive stockages. Stockages that the United States has as well. We just aren't using them as much. The conglomerate of NATO countries can far, and I mean far, outspend the Russians, especially under a sanctions regime. The United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, France, all are ramping up production, and over time we will likely see that play a part on the battlefield. And I can't stress enough over time. We're talking year at least. And what we'll see on this battlefield is Ukraine just continue to grind away. They get 500 meters here, 2 kilometers there, and eventually they find a weak point because Russia is using conscripted inmates and Storm Z units. So therefore, they are finding it difficult to get a tactical advantage. The Ukrainians are now becoming very proficient because they are Western trained, they get Western equipment, and with every step Russia takes towards being more monstrous, the Western nations become more willing to give them additional more advanced equipment that is more appropriate for the type of fight they're having, such as these cluster munitions. And that brings me to the discussion I want to have about this 100,000 troops and 900 tanks. I want to express that when he said that, he didn't say there was 100,000 additional troops on top of the troops that Russia was providing in that Sumy region of where the northern parts of the battlefield are. Those are just what they had. It's what they're facing. It's not the troops that were there and then suddenly Russia surged an additional 100,000 troops. No, what he said is there's 100,000 troops there and roughly 900 tanks, but the Ukrainians are managing it over there. That is what it is. It's not that they had 80,000 troops and then suddenly 100,000 troops showed up with 900 tanks. No, that's kind of a misconception I continue to keep seeing. And every time Russia decides to leave the trenches and go on the offensive, it is a huge detriment to them because cluster munitions are extraordinarily effective against personnel in the open. And so what's happening is if Russia decides that they are going to leave their trenches, leave their defenses to try to retake territory from Ukraine, they're getting slammed in the face by cluster munitions and losing many, many troops. And this is going to continue because there are millions of cluster munitions being provided now to Ukraine, and it feeds into Ukraine's their plan to attrit soldiers. I've said this many times before. The counteroffensive, yes, we want them to take territory, but their counteroffensive is to draw the Russian reserve forces forward to be destroyed, and then the Ukrainians can eventually just walk over their corpses. They can eventually just take the land because there's just no more Russian troops, or there's just not enough Russian troops there. This also follows along the line of how they're hitting their logistics hubs, how the Ukrainians are hitting behind the enemy lines in places where for their resupply or their repair facilities or their ammo depots and things of that nature. So it is to make life as painful as possible for the Russians in Ukraine, not necessarily take a giant chunk of land. Eventually, if, and this is the big if with Western support continues, the Ukrainians will be able to start taking chunks of land, because the bottom line is the Russians cannot match the West when it comes to reconstitution, when it comes to spending, when it comes to bringing combat power to include ammunition, artillery, intelligence, tanks, etc., to the battlefield. The more Russia continues to be monstrous, the more willing Western nations are to provide additional equipment to the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians are able to continue to kind of slog it out. They can continue to have this slugfest with Russia, but because they are getting trained more, they have more people to draw from than Russia, because Russia's not bringing in more conscripts at this moment. Because they have all of this to draw from, because they're getting the training, because they have the financial and equipment backing of the entirety of NATO plus NATO partners, Ukraine over time will be able to take the fight to Russia in ways that are more meaningful than just trying to take 500 meters, 1,000 meters, etc. It just takes time, and I think that a lot of people are saying Russia's time is on Russia's side. No, they're running rapidly out of the ability to generate combat power, both from an industrial standpoint and also from a personnel standpoint. And eventually, the calm, collected, more deliberate approach of the Ukrainians is going to overcome the Russians' ability to just throw people at the problem. And that's when we'll see potential breakthroughs. When that happens, I don't know. Will it happen this year? I really don't know. I would hope so, but we don't entirely know. So we'll have to see, I guess, is the question. We'll have to see what comes forward. What I do know is Ukraine continues to need our support in order to continue to gain superiority on the battlefield over Russia. It's just going to take some time.